Rog, over to you.
All right. Hi, welcome everyone to the nth module feedback session. We've been hard at work making some progress to some modules, and hopefully we'll be able to give you some useful updates, and you might have some good feedback for us. So the big news is that we've decided that based on feedback, we've decided to accept the module proposal. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. So we've had great feedback since the start of the year. I think everyone seems to say that this is a good way forward, and basically having it as totally experimental means that we can't move forward as fast as we'd like. So be great, we need to move forward. So we've decided that we're going to accept it, and we're also going to enable it by default. I'll talk about that in a moment. Yes, so we've essentially we're following something like the Go proposal process, where they said likely accept and then accept, and so we'll be moving forward with everything, all the implications of that. And we've had, it's been fantastic that people have trying it out and giving us useful feedback, because that's been really fantastic, particularly in regard to people using strange registries that we might not have access to, that kind of thing. So that's actually been really fantastic. And yeah, this is absolutely just the start. So lots to go with, particularly in the central registry, and lots of other interesting, cool things. Next slide, please. Oh, Paul. Yeah.
If I could just add that just the third bullet point there is fairly important, in that this doesn't, just because we're accepting it, doesn't mean to say we have implemented everything. As in, there are a number of pieces in the modules roadmap that still remain to be done. But as Rog said, to sort of unlock on that a bit more, mainly from the perspective of people being unsure, because it's sort of in an experimental phase. We've had a number of questions of people saying, well, can we start building on this? And of course, we have to be a tiny bit guarded in saying, well, the modules proposal isn't accepted yet, so we can't answer definitively on that. And so accepting the modules proposal doesn't say everything is implemented. It just says this is the direction of travel. And so it feels like we've got the right building blocks in there, especially with the OCI-based approach to things. That's worked out really well, as Rog said. And so, yeah, looking to now build on that firm foundation, if you like. But there's plenty of other bits to be implemented in the open source project or the central registry. But now that gives folks an idea of where we're heading, at least. So,
yeah, there are many really significant features still to be added, and small and large. For example, there's no replace statements yet, and that's definitely something that we want to add. And yeah, I could go on for a long time, but there are a bunch of issues that capture the kinds of things that features that we're lacking. But anyway, so let's talk about a little bit about what's immediately ahead. There's a link in the slide to our roadmap in general, and there are a few things just about to land, which related to accepting the modules proposal, and there's some central registry changes, for example, which relate to that. For example, we're going to become a bit more strict about module.q files, and that's useful in itself, because it means that we can do migrations more easily. And again, see the release project to see what's there. We have a nice screenshot of lots of things which are happening, upcoming, and to be fixed. In fact, those the RC1, those are still to be done in RC1. Alpha 5 is about to come out. So the big change, actually, I didn't mention that the big change is that we are going to enable modules by default. So you will no longer have to specify Q experiment equals modules. That will mean that you will, if you are using old code, you will have to change. You probably, it's mostly compatible, but it's quite likely that that you will if you've got extra fields in your module.q, for example, you will have to work in non-modules mode. And you can do that by saying q experiment equals modules equals false or off or 0. So that's a big change, and that you will quite possibly see an impact from that. But that setting, disabling the modules experiment, which is, I guess, no longer an experiment, will hopefully bring you back to previous mode for compatibility and using the old the logic that's already been used for resolving modules. There are some other changes which have been fixed in the last week or so. For example, if you have a big mono repo and you have some changes outside of your Q module, those won't actually count when you're doing qmod publish. It won't say you've got uncommitted changes. This is when you've got source Git. So you're specifying that the source that you're using Git as the source for your module. There's a bug fix. So some registries, in particular QLabs, was returning arbitrary error codes, like the OCI specification does specify the set of error codes that you can return, but some registries were returning arbitrary error codes not actually part of the spec. So now it seems reasonable to just treat all 404 errors as not found. And that's important because when we probe a registry, we have to look in a bunch of places, a bunch of repositories to find whether something exists or not. So if it's not found error, then we treat that as a fatal error. So that distinction is important there. We're restricting module.q files to data-only mode, which shouldn't affect anyone, but that makes it easier to rewrite to do automatic changes based on that. And I've added a command called qmodfix to automatically migrate from old style module.q. Oh, that's the main thing. You will have to run qmodfix if you're using old style modules, because the new module.q requires a language.version field, and that's because that determines what schema to use the module to read to check the module.q file against, and that because using a fixed schema that doesn't allow extra fields allows us to catch spelling errors in fields when you actually run any of the Q commands. So if you want to migrate, then run qmodfix. So that does a few things. It adds the language.version fields. If there are any top level fields, because we've got a new place to put custom fields, arbitrary fields, user derived fields. So if you want to put arbitrary data in your module.q, you can, but not at the top level, because otherwise anyone that wrote any field if they misspelled one of the top level fields, it just wouldn't be an error. And I think that's not a good user experience. And it will add a major version suffix to the module path, because now all modules have the major version in the module path. So if there's not one, it will add an @v0 suffix. So we can have a little demo of that. So if you've got a module.q file that looked like this beforehand, and if you run qmodfix, you get something that looks like this. I have to say I would like to change it so it's a bit cleverer about putting language :version on the same line, and similarly for the others. But for now, that's what it does. The name legacy. So we've got this kind of two-level thing going on in the custom field. Legacy is for basically anything that was at the top level before, because we haven't got a name for that. But the idea is, if you want to add your own fields, then you can choose that under choose a module name or a namespace, hopefully one that you control, and then there's no risk of two different people adding custom fields clashing. So there's a nice space for you to put your own data. Yes, Paul.
I'm assuming qmodfix won't actually change the values of fields, and so we just need to fix the slide here, because otherwise A goes from 5, 4, 6, 6, 7 to 4.
Well, that's a good question. Yes. Yes. Shall we change that? Yes. Let's change.
We'll fix that in the published slide.
Yes. Yes.
Just to pick up on the point you said earlier on, is that in theory, someone who is on an old style module.q file, they should be able to run qmod fix and then be in a good state, correct? As in that's our hypothesis. That's the reason behind having qmod fix, is effectively a one-shot fix it, and then you're fine for the latest version of Q.
That should be the case. If it isn't the case, then let us know.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, for those that have tools that are reading those top level fields, those tools will need to be updated in order to read data from custom legacy, or define your own place.
Yep.
So next slide, please. What is next? So there's probably a bunch of loose ends, but after accepting the modules proposal, you saw a bunch of things that are still to go in RC1 in the previous project page. We still got to release v90. We've been moving up the alphas. The next one is probably RC.1, and if you never know, that might be the final release candidate before actually releasing. And we still want to add integration tests for known OCI registries. We haven't done that yet. And as far as the central registry goes, we want to have some schemas in the central registry for some well-known services like GitHub Actions and and Kubernetes and that sort of thing. So that's a really, without that, the central registry isn't really that great, but with that, I think it becomes really, really useful. We also want to work on generating documentation for modules that are in the central registry, akin to the Go package, pkg.go.dev, and there will be a roadmap to follow about these things. Next slide, please.
Could even do a very brief demo of that. The modules docs proof of concept. This is living off the central registry. So I've now just got to rejig my shared screens. Give me 1 second whilst I do that, and I totally forget what the keyboard shortcuts are. Let's try this. So is that large enough? Hopefully so. Good. So this is documentation that is already on qlang.org that folks who've tried out modules would be familiar with. This is a demo of how to work with modules in the central registry. And in particular, this ends up with actually publishing, where is it? Just down at the bottom here. Yeah, so here we go. For example, we're depending on, in this particular Q example here, we're depending on a module that's already been published to the central registry. And then we just sort of do a mod tidy, qmod tidy, and you can see how the module.q is updated in that situation, then a Q export, proving that we can evaluate based on something that is published to the central registry. The actual schema that we depend on there from the central registry is this one here. This is just a toy schema. This is in the first bit of documentation that Rog wrote for modules. And this document is actually one that is working with a custom module registry, but this is the schema of the thing that you publish as part of that tutorial. So it's a very basic sort of proof of concept of how this stuff is then going to work. Actually, you can't actually see the URL here, which is probably a tiny bit useful if we can. Now you can perhaps see the URL, but that's going to be small at the top there. You can see this is sitting off registry.q.work/docs, and then there's the module path after that. So this is very much in the spirit of pkg.go.dev. And this is just a very skeleton thing, as you can see for now. Very basic rendering of things, whereby that config schema that we have here is then rendered as follows here. Now, obviously, this is not the polished, finished thing, but there's a decent amount of pipeline / infrastructure, if you like, to put in place such that when things are published to the central registry, then we can start generating them, start generating docs automatically off the back of it. And in a style that is, in terms of a presentation and layout, that is much more like pkg.go.dev than this proof of concept that we have here. But at least hopefully the direction of travel is clear. Obviously, we'll be doing things like linking between definitions, etc. And this is then closely tied to the kinds of information we surface via the LSP as well. So just to give a demonstration of another module here, again, there's nothing particularly significant here other than just sort of giving a bit of evidence, if you like, that we're building out this pipeline such that this stuff will work automatically off the central registry. And as a few folks have inquired, the registry, if I can call it that is the central registry, we're also exploring whether we can make hosted versions of that available for folks as well. But we're focusing for now on the central registry. But for those people who are using Q in like a company setting with their own OCI backend, that's totally fine. You can continue to do that. You just won't have this sort of documentation and or enhanced Q front end. But we're exploring, as you can see, doing a lot of experimentation via the central registry, because that's as good a place as any. Especially we'll have plenty of good examples of tough modules when it comes to rendering them. For example, the GitHub Actions schema is scarily deep and nested and complex, and so there are plenty of challenges when it comes to working out how to render those sorts of things. So it's a good playground, for want of a better phrase, to work out how to render these things best. Yep, so we're making a bit of progress on that side of things. And of course, now I've lost the entire slide deck. I think that was the last of the slides. It was
Q&A, you can say it.
Q&A. Sorry, couldn't resist. So, yep, that's where we're at. I guess the 0.9.0 Alpha 5 release will go out probably later today, barring any release issues. And qlang.org will be updated at the same time to use that version. If anybody has any questions. Otherwise, we will update I can just do some fill-in speaking now. We'll update the modules issues, Rog, to indicate the discussions, to show they've been accepted.
Well, unless anyone has really significant objections right now, no names mentioned, Tony.
No, I have no objections.
Excellent.
I have been out of the loop for a little while, but last time I looked, it was in a good place.
It's good
Tony
to have you
says
back.
yes, we can go.
It's really good to have you back, Tony. Richard, thank you again especially for helping to kick the tires on so much of this with a number of other folks who are on Slack, and now a number of them on Discord as well. That's been invaluable in helping us to test this stuff out, especially against different OCI backends, as Rog said. So,
yeah, happy to help. I'm super excited that this is going to be coming out from behind an experiment.
Yep. And there may be a few. Hopefully, there are no bugs by us flipping the default. That's sort of half a large part of the reason for having it be an experiment, is that there can be people testing out both sides of the experiment. I'll ignore Daniel's comment. But yeah, I guess, Rog, there's no reason why there can't be bugs lurking in there. It'll be nice, actually. So one of the issues, or a couple of the tasks, I guess, to do after the release today is update a whole load of the docs on qlang.org. So that's not such a straightforward thing. Well, yeah, we could do that in 2 phases, to be honest with you. So we can just start ripping out all the documentation that says XYZ is experimental, just to make it clear. Daniel says, perhaps we could mention how long we expect to keep the old mode around. That is a very, very good question. I suspect at least 1 release cycle, but I can't think there'd be too much reason to hold it around more than 1, Rog.
I don't think so, but it really depends on user feedback, honestly, I would say.
Yeah, I would say as soon as we can go through a whole release cycle with no reported regressions that worry us, then I would be happy to drop it. So we'll see how 0.9 goes.
Evaluator stuff is the new evaluator stuff is experimental. We're likely to add more experiments, so hopefully we don't get to experiment soup at some point with sort of everything being guarded by an experiment. But it's an incredibly valuable way of signaling to folks that this is properly experimental and experimentable via the Q command and the Go API as well. So that is good. In which case, we might just wrap up early then, and we can get 0.9.0 Alpha 5 out before the end of the day. Roger, anything else from?
I don't think so. I mean, unless are we sure nobody has any questions? They don't seem to.
I was hoping someone was going to interrupt me if they had something to say. I was just padding.
Apparently not. This is good.
Thank you, everybody. We'll share links to in the modules channels on Discord and Slack to the accepted proposal. See you all soon.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Yeah.
Thanks, everybody.